being here. On behalf of the Center for Teaching Excellence, I want to extend a warm welcome to Carin Anick, our special speaker today. And she will talk to us about getting students to the finish line 8-week course format. Carin is the Curriculum and Assessment Coordinator at Waukesha County Technical College, supporting college faculty in developing and revising courses and programs. Her expertise extends to integrating classroom technology, providing LMS support, and facilitating faculty professional development. Carin's extensive background includes designing and adapting course curriculum for accelerated, hybrid, and online formats. Notably, she played a pivotal role in her college's successful transition to an 8-week term format, which launched in fall 2020. Additionally, over the past 17 years, Carin has served as an adjunct instructor in human services, sociology, and liberal art at both 2-year and 4-year colleges, primarily teaching in an accelerated online and hybrid settings. So without further ado, I want to welcome Carin.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Oh, those bios, man, they always get me like 17 years. That number gets bigger and bigger. I feel like I'm aging myself. You did hear correctly. I am the coordinator of curriculum assessment at Waukesha County Technical College. And one of the kind of my crowning jewels was to really help, as a part of the curriculum department, help us transition to an 8-week format in fall of 2020. So I want you to just absorb that for a minute. Fall of 2020. What was happening in fall of 2020? Yes, we were a full-blown pandemic. We transitioned to an 8-week term in the midst of a full-blown pandemic. So we'll talk a little bit about that and some of those pieces today. I'm going to go ahead and jump into my presentation, but I have to do some switching of slides for people online. And hello to them as well. And I apologize. Nope, this isn't one. We're going to be doing a little bit of back and forth on the slides here for people at home. Okay, now we should be all good. Okay. All right. So, does this go bigger for people here, or is this as big as it goes for people in the room?
Might go bigger. That should expand. Try that.
How about this?
Yeah, that. Try that.
Nope.
But
not going. Okay. I'll do my best to help with the small slides here in the room, so I apologize for that. Negotiating online versus in person. It's not always easy. As anybody teaching hybrid formats, right? It's a challenge, right? It can be really challenging, but we are flexible and can roll with it. I have a couple of goals that we're going to work to achieve today. But this slide always gives me kind of a little chuckle. I'm actually going to stand on this side because otherwise people at home can't really see me. This one always gives me a little chuckle. My youngest daughter is a soccer goalkeeper, but she's 17. She's not really young anymore. She's been a goalkeeper forever. And if you really look at the picture, you can see somebody's actually scoring on that goalkeeper. In our household, that's not okay. Like, she would be mad if she knew I had that picture up there. So every time I use this picture about goals, it makes me chuckle just a little bit because we are going to score a couple goals today, no matter how good the goalkeeper is today. We are going to look at the why of an 8-week format. Why do you use 8 weeks? Why do you want to go to 8 weeks? What are the benefits? What are the drawbacks? Those kinds of things. We're going to really take a deep dive on the why to help us understand and embrace that piece of it. We're also going to look at what are the important pieces of a quality course, right? What makes a good 8-week course? Because you can't just jam everything in and expect it to go well. So we need to kind of look at what makes a good 8-week course. And then at the very end, and this is my favorite for faculty, so for those of you who are faculty online or faculty in the room, or even instructional designers in the room or online, we're going to look at some high-level pieces that you can utilize when you're starting to work towards creating an 8-week version of your course, okay? So that's our goals today. To get us started, I have an activity for us. I want us to be thinking about 8-week courses. So if you have a phone handy, I know you all have it right next to you on the table, just as our students likely do, feel free to scan the QR code. For those of you at home, you should be able to scan from your screen. This is going to take you to a Padlet. If you're not familiar with Padlet, it's an online bulletin board and basically allows you to post just about anything on the board. In this case, I want you to just purge your brain of what are those drawbacks of an 8-week course? What are the negatives? What's circling your brain? Like, why was it going to work? Or if you love 8 weeks, maybe what are the myths you've heard that you think maybe are those negatives of an 8-week course? And in just a minute, I'll shift to the actual Padlet itself so you guys can actually see what people are writing. But you push the plus sign at the bottom, and it will allow you to make your post. Padlet updates in real time, so what you're going to see on your screen is posts from all of you starting to populate on the screen. And you'll also see a blank screen if you all leave me hanging. Give you about another 30 seconds. I can see some of you still typing or thinking about this. Just a little bit. Awesome. Well, thank you all for answering that question, starting to think about, purge your brain of those drawbacks that we all kind of worry about when we think about teaching in an 8-week course. This is all what you guys have here. This is super common. I myself, even when teaching in 8 weeks many years ago, more than a decade ago, was thinking like, how do I cover all that stuff in 8 weeks? How do I do it? Is it going to be enough time? Is it going to be too fast? Are students going to be able to hang in there? And you have a lot of that same thing here. A lot of questions about, is it going to be just as rigorous? Is the rigor going to stay the same? Is it going to be enough time? We're worried about retention and actual learning happening. Are they going to be able to absorb all of that information in time to finish that class and then take it with them as they go on to the next class? Thank you so much for putting these up. We're going to kind of address these as we go. So I kind of want to now, we're going to shift gears a little bit. And to shift. So now we're going to shift to the opposite. We looked at our myths. Now let's think about what are the positives. And so I have one more Padlet for you. This one should be nice and blank. So now you're going to really shift gears. Shift your brain into thinking, what are the positives? What are the advantages? And this one should function the same as the last one. you about 20 more seconds to do that. And see a few of you still typing. Awesome. Thank you so much for interacting with that one as well. And you see some themes popping up here, right? Things about being focused on 1 or 2 classes versus 3 or 4. Really taking a deep dive into that content. Flexible schedules, graduation faster, potentially. Maybe not always faster, maybe the same, but sometimes definitely faster. Multiple entry points, that's an important one, right? Students can pick up in the middle. Maybe they haven't been able to do that in the past, not as often. Awesome, thank you. We're going to talk about these. So some of these are going to come up in just a few minutes as we think about why we want to shift to that 8-week course format. Okay, on shift. All right, so why do we do 8-week courses? This is really important, I find, for faculty. Let's do a little bit of adjusting here. For faculty, I think this really is an important piece. Before you get to actually trying to convert your course content, right? You need to really understand the why. Actually, all adult learners want to understand the why. How is this important? How can I use this in my life? Why is this important to me? And so for me, when I work with faculty, helping them kind of see this piece is really important. So we're going to take a little bit of a deep dive into why the heck would we do this. But as we do this, none of this is going to be a surprise to you, okay? Many of these things were already up on the board. And the very first one I always like to talk about is retention and completion. As faculty, I always feel like these words have like this huge meaning, like, right, like, oh, yes, retention and completion. So important. But we also want to focus on the teaching, right? We want to focus on the classroom and the fun pieces. We don't always want to think about that retention and completion. But in our landscape of higher ed, our current landscape, especially with difficulties in enrollment, retention and completion has really taken on this like vital importance in our institutions. And so it's really important that we are retaining students and helping them get to completion. But what's really interesting about this is because we have that issue with enrollment, we need to retain and complete not just our traditional aged college students, but also our non-traditional learners, right? So we have all of these non-traditional learners that we're attracting back, and many of these students, actually all college students who are at a two-year institution, take about 6 years to complete their degree. It takes time to complete a degree when you're going part-time, right? Retention becomes that much more important when you have that extended timeline for any college student. When you're trying to retain non-traditional students, you need some flexibility in what you're offering and how you're offering it. These students have a lot of obligations, right? Non-traditional can mean a wide variety of things. It can mean the age that they are when they enter in the institution. It can mean their own obligations, and right, they have their own families, their own full-time jobs, maybe they're caring for adult parents. It can also mean how they left high school, right? So they're coming from maybe a GED or some type of high school completion program. But all of these students have some unique needs when they come into college. And when we can offer them an alternative format that helps them maintain and retain and then ultimately complete their degrees, we add that ability, that flexible schedule that they're craving. And this kind of goes hand in hand with this next piece. How many of you have a schedule that looks like this? Right? Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of nods in the room. This is what our schedule, this is what our student schedules look like. My high schooler schedules look like this. And they don't even have some of the obligations that all of us have, right? Our students all have significant obligations, right? Part-time or full-time jobs, maybe their own children, their own families, other household obligations, maybe aging parents, and they are busy. When we can offer flexibility around how they schedule classes, it can really increase and connect to that retention and completion from the previous slide. It can also improve their overall workload and their balance as they're working their way through college. Okay, so the advantages and disadvantages. This one's really interesting. You guys did this at the beginning, right? You purged your brain of all the negatives. I'm worried about rigor, I'm worried about all of these pieces, and then you kind of started to identify the advantages. What's really interesting is faculty kind of sometimes get stuck, right? There's so many disadvantages, and our brains tend to go straight to the negative. There could be like 2 negatives and 8 positives, and we just have a tendency to hold on to those negatives. When you really look at the research, when you look at the learning and what the research shows, it shows that there really isn't a difference between the actual learning happening in the classrooms and compared to 8 versus 16 weeks, compared to the accelerated versus non-accelerated formats. So we think that there's going to be these difficulties in rigor and content and in success, but what the studies have shown us so far is that actually isn't the case. It's kind of a myth. And that students complete and do as well or better in those accelerated formats. And so we want to be careful not to hang on to those negatives when really what the research is showing is a little bit different. Okay? All right. The other thing we want to think about is competition. And this isn't always at the forefront of my thinking from a faculty perspective, right? But the reality is we have to be aware of what's going on around us and what our customer wants from us, right? Especially in our current higher education landscape where we're all fighting for the same smaller group of students. We need to be aware of what are the other colleges around us doing? What are our competitors doing? If other colleges around us are offering 8-week, online, hybrid, face-to-face, they're offering this variety and we don't, our customers are going to go somewhere else, right? So while this is our least favorite to think about, it is still part of a reality when we're serving our customers. We need to think about what our customers want and what they need from their education. Okay? So while we don't love to think about it, if we really want to win the race, if we want to attract those students, we need to increase that flexibility. Okay, so knowing these pieces, what does the data show? This is always the part where they're like, okay, well, Carin, that's great. Sure, we know all these pieces. This isn't new information, right? Yes, retention and completion is great, and it's super important, and I want to be, a good competitor for my customers. But what if we do this? What's going to happen? Well, I can share a little bit about what's happened for my institution, and we undertook this amidst a global pandemic, and give you an idea of like how it can play out. Okay. So I'll tell you a little bit about Waukesha County Technical College. And I think some of this is somewhat similar to your own institution, actually, as I was chatting with Paul before we got started today. So we're located in Pewaukee, Wisconsin, which is about 20 miles west of Milwaukee. We're in Waukesha County, which is just to the side of Milwaukee County. We actually pull students primarily from Waukesha County, but also from around that kind of metro Milwaukee area, right? The counties all that surround us. There are other technical colleges in our area, Milwaukee Area Technical College, and then others as well. But we tend to pull from some overlapping communities in those institutions. We have a student headcount of about 23,000. A majority of our students are part-time. They are working. They are doing other things. They have other things on their plate. They are not the typical full-time college student that you'd expect coming right out of high school. Our average age is 26. This is actually very low for us. Not too long ago, even just a couple years ago, this was probably closer to 33. We have some initiatives that have really attracted a number of high schoolers to our campus. So we have this influx of very young students, which has very much trended our age downwards. We have about a 20% racial and ethnic minority, and we're split 50-50 across male-female. This is what our current term structure looks like. It's essentially a 5-term structure. So in the fall, we have 2 8-week terms. We have 1 week in the middle, our fall break. And then in the spring, we also have 2 8-week terms, spring break in the middle. We have an 8-week summer term. Kind of inside of those, we have these extra interim terms between fall 2 and then also spring 2 and into summer. And those are super accelerated, about 2 weeks. And so we have some key courses that we offer in certain programs that we offer in a really condensed format, and we call those our interim terms. The goal here is really that students are going to school all year round, that they don't really ever have to stop, that they can keep right on going and get to that completion in a timely manner, right? So after we shifted to those 8-week terms, we started collecting data, right? As all good institutions do, you collect data, you see, okay, how's it going? And this was our first pull of data. We looked specifically at courses that had transitioned formats. And the reason why that's important is because we had courses that were in 8-week formats in some areas of the college. So we didn't look at those as part of our data. We specifically concentrated on any course that went from the 16 to the 8-week format. And so over the 2 years of data we have here, you can see we saw a small increase in student success, which is really interesting. And kind of made us think like, really? Just that's it? That's all we saw? Like 1%? That's what? Well, when you start to look at the data, you realize there's a reason for it. Many reasons probably, but a couple of reasons. So when you kind of take a wider pull of our data and you look at course success across all of our course terms and over the course of a number of years, you can see from 2019 to 2020, we had a very, very significant jump in our course success. This actually was pre-8-week terms. Okay, so when they really drilled down, they found this was before we shifted. And so it became, why did we have this huge jump before we did 8 weeks, right? What's the variables there? And our best educated guesses are, leading up to this shift, we had a lot of professional development. So not only did we were working towards 8-week conversion, we also had a pandemic, right? We had this huge influx of faculty development because we all had to shift virtual the spring before we shifted to 8 weeks, right? So we had this huge immediate influx. As a college, we also shifted LMSs the year before. So our faculty had a few very difficult years back to back. We shifted from Blackboard to Canvas, and so we had really worked hard to support faculty through all of these changes. And so I think what we're seeing a little bit is some dividends that we got a little bit early. What's most important here is that we're staying pretty close to that 86%, which we saw, and so really at least a 3% jump, if not more, in that last year that we're now maintaining. And now remember, this is, of course, all courses. Yes?
How do you define student success?
So student success in our college is C or better. That's passing. Okay. Yeah. C or better is considered passing in our courses. So if I take a course and I don't pass with a C, I have to redo that course in order to pass. Yep. So after that initial data, our kind of research department was like, you know, we really want to take a different approach at getting data going forward. Yeah, it's great to know kind of student success, but how can we really take a closer, deeper look at what's happening for our courses and our students? And so this is what they did so far. They divided into categories. And so what you're seeing here is in the middle in white is group 3. That means in group 3, if you land in the white category, you had no change. 16 to 8, your course success has basically remained stable, hasn't changed. If you move into the green categories, then you've seen an increase in student success in your courses. If you shift down into the orange, we have some potential for decline or an actual significant decline in student success. And so what our department did, or the research department did, was they really looked at, I think it's like over 130 courses, and really divided out by school to see what was happening across courses and really get a good idea of what's happening at the course level. And so now what you're going to see is really what happened at the course level over the last couple of years. And when you look at our school as a whole, this is what happened. In the middle, in the pink, is what stayed the same, what stayed stable. So the course success rate stayed about or equal to the same no matter what format they were delivered, okay? And then you can see we have about a 9% increase in group 2 and a 15% increase in group 1. These mean we saw an increase in student success in these courses. We do have a small group of courses that we'll take a look at in just a minute that are seeing either a potential decline or a significant decline in student success. And we can actually tell you exactly what courses they are, what college, what programs they're in, and really start to look at the why of those specific courses. And that's actually what our institution is working on right now. So I'll show you, and I apologize for the format. It has to do with the Blackboard sharing. It's kind of scrunching up the slides a little bit. But this is the School of Arts and Sciences. So this is primarily our general education department. Trying to fix this. But they also do have an Associate of Arts and an Associate of Science of Liberal Arts degrees as well. And so what you can see is a majority of the courses landed in that white group with no change in student success, which is great. That's not a fail. That's, yes, we're doing just as well in 8 weeks. Our students are still being successful in 8 weeks, okay? We also saw a number of courses land in that dark green category. What's really interesting about the courses that land in that category is these are some of the most commonly taken general education requirements. Intro to Psychology, for example, is taken just about every program across the college. So while it's just one course listed in this green, its impact across students and increased success is pretty big, right? Because it's taken by so many students. Economics is another one, college math is another one. Those are all very common general education requirements. So to see this kind of jump means we're impacting students across our campus, not just in one program, not just in one section. We do have a couple of courses in this area that we saw some decline. What's interesting about these courses, and this is where it gets tricky, and this is why it's so important to dive into that course, the N, so to speak, the number of students that you're looking at in these courses is really, really tiny. Okay, we're talking maybe 9 students in Calc. Okay, and then if you look at Calc 2 and 3, it gets even smaller, right? Because the number of students in those specific programs that need that sequence is small in our college. So, you know, it could be one student who fails versus passes that could drastically impact those statistics. Yes?
2 things. I apologize if you already said this, but when you went to the 8-week format, did you drop 16-week format?
We didn't drop 16-week format entirely, but almost.
Okay.
We have a few courses that stayed in 16 weeks. One of the key things that stayed in 16 weeks was some of our internships or practicums. A lot of those stayed in 16 weeks. It was easier for students to complete those required hours over that time frame. We had a couple of courses that stayed in that format, but for majority courses went to 8 weeks. And the push was really like, if we're going to get on this bandwagon, we're going to get on it. We're going to fully get on it. We're not just going to offer a little bit here and there. Yeah. So everything went to 8 weeks. And so we have seen some change, though. So that's a really good question. We have seen some courses shift back. Not very many, like less than 5. The Calc sequence is one of those sets of courses. We shifted back to a 16-week format for those and kind of stacked them over the 2 8 weeks so that they can better fit with the way the program courses lay out and students can get more increased support. We're hoping that continues to improve the success of that course. The tricky thing about those courses is they're hard. They're not easy courses, right? So we're going to see struggle in these courses no matter what format we offer them in.
Well, wait then.
Yeah.
But those columns are compared to 16-week. So there was a drop in effectiveness in the group 4 and group 5. I mean, yes, they're hard, but they were hard before too.
They were hard before too. Yes, absolutely. Yes. So yes, we are comparing them across 8 to 16. But like I said, the tricky thing is that N, it could be one student, one more student drop, so it could have just been one, so it's again, you got to really drill down to some of those variables. And then I have other schools, and again, I apologize for the way this is kind of showing across the screen here, but the School of Applied Tech is probably our most hands-on school, with a lot of our manufacturing and STEM programs and graphic arts and things like that. You can see a bulk of our courses landed in white or above. We had a significant increase for students here with a number landing in the green. We have a couple, I think just 3 here, that landed in the orange. And again, that's really looking at what are the reasons. Is it actually the 8-week format? Because there's sometimes lots of variables happening in a course. And so it's really drilling down to what's going on in those courses, why are students not being successful, and does it mean we need to look at the course format? Is it a content thing? Is there some other factor happening? And really getting at what are those variables that are impacting that student success. And you can see that across the other schools. The School of Business, this one, we see a lot more in the white category because this school actually had the most courses already in 8 weeks. So this school had a number of programs that were already fully converted before we did our conversion. So they're kind of just trucking along the way that they were before. And then School of Health, we see another, again, the same trends that we're seeing over and over. A bulk of our courses are white or above, and we always seem to have this handful that are doing better in 8 weeks. And then again, looking at a couple of these pieces that are in the orange, I can tell you this one shifted back to 16 weeks, and this one is actually being split. ICD diagnosis coding is a pretty hefty content area, and that whole program is actually under restructuring for a wide variety of reasons, nothing to do with 8-week terms. And so that course is actually being split out into 2 different courses at different credits. Yes?
I feel bad interrupting you, but I'm going to forget if I don't ask. What are your demographics?
What do you mean?
Your student body, meaning socioeconomic class and all of that.
I don't have the actual demographics for socioeconomic status, but we're about 20% ethnic minority and a majority white.
Okay.
Yeah. I can get that for you. I just don't have it handy.
You don't need to.
Yeah.
I just kind of wondered if you're comparable to us or not. It sounds like you're not, but that doesn't mean.
I would say we're maybe like a step above, right? So like as Paul and I were talking a little bit about your demographics here, Waukesha County in and of itself tends to does have somewhat affluent areas, higher middle class areas. It does also have areas with significant challenges, for sure. And then pulling from Milwaukee, we have a significant population who might struggle in higher education institutions. So it really can be very diverse depending on where we're pulling from. In the School of Protective and Human Services, we see, again, kind of that same trend of white and then green. What's really interesting for me when I was looking at this, I actually used to teach in this school. So I actually knew some of these courses that were landing in the orange, and I was like, that family systems course, I actually wrote it a number of years ago and taught it for many, many years. And so I was like, why is that orange? It's been in 8 weeks for a really long time. This was one of those areas where they had 8 weeks before we converted. And then when I drilled down into that with the associate dean, we found that it had gone in through a curriculum revision that maybe was impacting its success rates. And so as that's being backtracked, it will be interesting to see if that then makes a shift back into the white or the green. So just because a course lands in the orange doesn't always mean it's just the 8 weeks that's the factor, right? There could be other things going on in a course or in a program. This for me is one of my favorite slides, and it's the last of the research slides, and then we'll get into other content here. But for us, one of our goals in this was closing those success gaps, right, for our underrepresented populations. And we have some pretty wide gaps that we need to try and pull closed. And you can see for students who identify as Black, we saw a significant increase of over 6% success in those students just in those couple of years. So, and I actually am working on 2024 data for this. And I'm expecting a slight increase there as well. And you can see also then a similar increase for our students who identify as Latino. This is really, really important and is part of the reason why we wanted to make this change, because we actually see success for these students in these courses. The way the formats are structured, the way that you can almost like block scheduling, right? You take 1 or 2 at a time versus 4, can really make students who might struggle in a course more successful. And so we're really working hard to close these success gaps. Okay, one other thing that I always like to say before I move on into the next chunk is one of the most significant drawbacks that I hear from faculty that I work with is around retention, right? And we saw it when we purged our brains at the beginning, a lot of that mentioned retention, right? When you look at the research, unfortunately, it doesn't tell us anything about retention in 8-week accelerated formats. Unless somebody can find a really new study. If you do, please send it to me because I want to read it. The one at the bottom and really tiny, and I'll make sure you guys get a chance to actually get this file so you can access this, does have in that study they did like a pre and post test to determine the mastery of the content. And what they found was no change across an 8-week or a 16-week course in mastery of content using a pre and post test format. Does that really tell us about retention? Not really. It doesn't tell us if a year from now somebody's going to be able to pull what they do. So when we say like, oh, we're worried about retention, yeah, we can be worried about it, but the science isn't there to tell us what's going to happen with that. We don't know that an 8-week course immediately means this significant drop in retention. So just keep that in mind, that when we think like there's no way they're going to retain this information, there really isn't science to back up that claim. So, when we really thoughtfully design courses, the retention can be there. Okay, so I have one more thing for you guys to interact. And this question says, what do you think is important in a quality 8-week course? Let's just check my time here. Awesome. Okay, so this is actually a Mentimeter word cloud. So as I'm sure many of you have done word clouds in the past, grab the QR code. I'm going to shift to Mentimeter, which will also have a code on it, and allow us to see our word cloud. And the way word clouds work in Mentimeter is the more a word is written, so if you all say the same word, the word will get bigger. And if we have more variety, the words will get smaller. And I think you should be able to see it on your screen, but you can also see it on your larger screen here as people start to type in words. So again, the question is, what do you think is important in a quality 8-week course? And this is from your perspective as a faculty. Like when I'm creating a course, what's important? Lots of variety here in our words. Give you guys a few more seconds to add in any last-minute words. I can see right off the bat, communication continues to come up because it's one of our biggest. Not uncommon, but you're definitely right. Communication is key in an 8-week course with students and with instructors. Motivation, I love that intentionality is pretty big. We're going to talk a lot about being intentional in a course. Being organized and flexible and creative, all super, super important. Preparation, we kind of see that here. All of these, and I think you guys got it, so I think I could probably go early. You already know. No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. You guys already know the answers. Okay, so let's talk about what makes a good 8-week course. One of the things that I always tell faculty is you don't need to like scrap everything. Take your whole course and be like, out the window. It's just not realistic, and you've done such amazing things with that course. It's your baby, right? Like you would never just like toss it out. Yes.
I apologize. I should have asked this earlier.
Yes.
I don't know if I missed it. Are you talking online and in person?
Can be, yes, any format.
Okay.
Any format. So most of our courses at WCTC are in the hybrid format. So there's an online component and an in-person component. That's the most common format. We do have 8-week fully online. We do have some that are 8-week fully in person, where they double classroom time in certain areas, especially in our applied tech area. But we are talking across formats.
Thank you.
Yes.
Wait, could you get that data to us if you're going to send this out? Just your numbers, how many hybrid, how many, because you've had success with this program. I want to know those kinds of details. Unless you know now.
I don't know off the top of my head. I mean, literally a bulk of ours are hybrid. I would say probably close to 80 or 90% of our courses.
Well, then
are
that's
hybrid.
all I think.
Right. Yeah. A bulk of our courses are hybrid. Now, sometimes hybrid percentages vary, right? So it's not always a 50-50 split. It might be a 40-60. So but a majority of our courses are hybrid. Yeah.
When you say hybrid, is that like on campus and off campus, or is that some on video, some online? What does that look like?
And I apologize for those of you at home. I hope you've heard the questions so far. I should be repeating them. She's asking what does hybrid mean? A majority of our hybrid courses are asynchronous online and then in-person classroom. We do have synchronous online courses. On Zoom, we have some of that. Some of that is decreased, obviously, during the pandemic. Like, that was our biggest modality, of course. But we do still have some what we call synchronous online courses where we have, and that might be, again, hybrid, where there's still an asynchronous component and a synchronous component.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Is there a market for synchronous online, do you think?
Is there a market for synchronous online? I think we've seen a decreased demand for it. And again, I'm kind of guessing. I haven't actually looked at the actual data, but at least for our college, I think students, I think they either want to be online or they want to be face to face, right? They kind of want a little bit. They really are looking for one of those modalities. I think there are areas of our college that do it really well. Our IT areas, our tech areas do that really, really well. And that could be because those students are really comfortable with that technology, right? So there are certain pockets where we still see the demand for a synchronous online version. But I think that has decreased some. It's that whole Zoom fatigue. Nobody wants to be on Zoom anymore, right? Yes.
So do you offer what you think they want in the first, in 2020 or whatever, whenever, and then you see this fill up? So that means there's more demand for that. Are you just playing it by ear?
I think a little bit. I mean, I think I'm not in the role that actually makes that decision, so I'm not really sure how they choose that. But I would imagine they pay attention to the demand. I know that there is a demand for online, for sure, when that makes sense for the courses, right? There also is a demand for our face-to-face, our courses that have that face-to-face component, both in our general education and obviously in courses like welding or nursing, you have to have the face-to-face component that's there. Right. So, but we do have seen the demand for online, and we do try and pay attention to that. I just don't know how they're making those decisions. Yeah.
I'm looking at one of the courses, one of the microbiology courses is what I teach.
Okay.
And it's a hybrid one. Just want to have an idea of what the scheduling looks like. Here it says that the days is Tuesday, so I'm assuming that the online component is asynchronous.
It's
asynchronous.
Asynchronous, yeah.
And they just meet those 8 weeks, just one day, just one Tuesday.
One day, that one might be one day. I don't know off the top of my hours. Yeah, so 3 hours. That one strikes me as probably a 50-50 if I had to guess right off the top of my head. I'm not 100% sure what the hybrid division is, but likely that means half online, half in person. I would imagine a bulk of that in-person time is a lot of the lab time, right? Because microbiology has that
So when it says here days Tuesday, it just means just a Tuesday.
Just that Tuesday.
Just on Tuesday.
Just that Tuesday. And then there's usually a time slot listed to
Yeah,
it.
it's
So
3 hours.
yeah, 3 hours. Yeah. Yeah. And we have, courses like that, and that one might not have as many offerings. Like if you were to look at an intro to psychology or an English course, right, you would see multiple offerings. So you have some that are 2 days a week, some that are 1, evenings, like all over the map, right? Okay, so let's jump back into our content here. So when you're looking at changing your course from a 16 to an 8, it's important that you know that you don't have to throw it all out, right? You could start from scratch. You could start with a blank template and use your course as like a library to pull in. But I actually usually tell instructors to really just let's use what's there and take a look at it and see if we can't do some conversion, okay? Now, here's the difference. In the literature, when you start to look at this, a lot of times they use the word compressed and converted almost interchangeably. They're not the same, right? When you think of a converted course, look at this red car, right? A normal red car, right? And then we convert it. It functions the same. It runs the same. It gets you to the same place in the same way, except maybe it's windier and my hair would be more luminous, which maybe would be good. I don't know. But it does the same things as a regular non-converted car, right? But if I compress that car, I'm not getting very far, right? And this is where I always tell faculty you have to be really careful. You cannot jam a 16-week course into 8 weeks and be successful. Your students are going to struggle. It's just not feasible. Yes?
We do it every summer.
Are they successful? I guess would be
Well,
the
the thing
question.
is, we have this articulation agreement with other colleges where we have to teach the same exact
Content.
lab, same content completely. So we do it, and we are very successful, but these are often a different population of students.
Yes, and so I hear that a lot. I've seen that even. I used to teach in summer all the time, and I'd get students from other colleges and like all that kind of thing. So it's not comparing apples to apples. And I would say even, and yes, you probably do have to keep it the same, right, because of those agreements. But I would say when I would teach in summer, typically my 8-week version of that 16-week course was never identical. Like, did you cover all the same competencies? Absolutely. Did they do a lot of the same key assessments? Absolutely. Did they do the same learning? For sure. But some of my learning activities were likely very different, right? I might have tweaked them, changed them, condensed them, changed what was happening so that they could do that learning and progress through it in a different timeline, okay? So we want to really avoid compressing our courses whenever possible.
But you meet the same amount of hours, right? I know online is different.
It is online.
But if it's face-to-face, you're still meeting the same exact number of hours.
Yep. Yes, but when there's a hybrid component, you still want to be intentional and thoughtful about your redesign because it's even, the amount of face-to-face courses we have that are fully face-to-face is tiny, right? It's not ideal for students typically because the amount of time they need to spend on campus for those courses is cumbersome, right? And so it's very specific programs that have that requirement, like an apprenticeship where they're already here for 8 hours that day, right? That kind of thing. Yeah. So when you are designing your course, you want to be really intentional. And I said this word would come up earlier. You guys put this word on the screen as well. It's very, very important that we are intentional about our course design, that we think about how we're using all those best practices that we know work and getting it into our classroom. And so when you're teaching in a hybrid format like we are, it's important to leverage technology. It's important to leverage it in a thoughtful, intentional way though, right? You don't just jam a bunch of technology in the classroom and because we think it might work. You want to be thoughtful about how you're using it and how it helps complement the content. You also really want to make sure that you're using those active learning practices, that you're not forgetting to add those collaborative components because we all know when students collaborate with you, when they collaborate with each other, they learn the best, right? And so you need to still make sure you're using those pieces and really pushing those to the forefront because in 8 weeks, your time is smaller. So those become just that much more important, right? You also really want to be intentional about the content I had a number of faculty who struggled with this piece, the idea that the textbook is the course. And it's just not necessarily true. The textbook is just one tool we use, right, for the content. And I have faculty who would say, but I can't cover 15 chapters in 8 weeks. Okay, yeah, you're right. Maybe you can't cover 15 chapters. Do you have to? Let's look at your course objectives and see what you actually need to cover and how those 15 chapters fit in. Because maybe you don't. Maybe you really just need 10 of those chapters, right? Maybe you just need a certain, and maybe in different order, and those kinds of things. So kind of remembering that all the pieces of our course are a tool, not just the course itself. We also really want to be cognizant of the learning cycle when we're creating this. And I know we're in the kind of Center for Teaching Excellence. I would imagine the staff here would say, yes, think about the learning cycle. There are lots of models for the learning cycle. Your college may have a model that they tend to use. We have a very specific model in the technical college system in Wisconsin, and actually a very prescribed way that we write, a very detailed way that we write curriculum. When faculty are developing the lower level of their curriculum, which includes full learning plans, they have to have activities in each one of these categories. So they need to have motivational activities, comprehension activities, practice activities, and application. We want to see a lot of work in this area, especially in an 8-week course, because it's very difficult to apply if we don't practice enough. And I can't say that enough. Practice, practice, practice. Formative assessment, we're going to talk about that in a minute, is really, really key in those 8-week courses because they do move faster. So then, and I'm not gonna rush through this, but we might go a little bit past 3 for content. I was hoping to kind of stop at 3 and open it for questions, but I want to make sure we get to this because this is probably the most useful for you as faculty. So how can I take on this challenge? How can I convert to a 16-week course to an 8-week course? And I want you to think about doing laundry. If you are anything like me, you hate doing laundry. I hate doing laundry. And I want you to think about these different size hampers, right? We all can imagine these in our households, right? The little round one that kind of fits on your hip, it's little. Maybe it has just enough room for a load of towels. You're walking around your room, you're going to your bathrooms, and you're throwing in your towels, and you put them in your washing machine, right? And then maybe in some of our rooms, we have this taller one, right? Sits on the floor, it's about yay high. You get maybe a week's worth of clothes in it, and then it starts to spill over. And then we can imagine the larger utility cart where maybe a laundry service might be putting multiple loads in a cart. As you're thinking about this, I want you to now imagine your course objectives. Your course objectives likely fit into one of these buckets, not based on importance, but based on complexity, the amount of time it takes to cover, how easy it is for students to conceptually learn it, right? And so if something is a little bit lighter, is maybe not super complex, is students tend to learn it fairly easily, it would go in the smaller laundry bucket. If something is in the middle, maybe it's a little bit more complex, takes just a little bit more time to learn or grasp, or maybe just a little bit more practice, it goes in the bigger bucket. For those really big, complex learning objectives, maybe those go in the largest of the buckets. And what I usually have faculty do is I have them divide out those competencies based on the buckets and really start to think about what needs the most amount of time in my course. And this really helps them map out, how am I going to sequence a course over 8 weeks? How am I going to spend my time? Where do I need to spend the most majority of my time? Not because something's less important than something else, but because something might need more attention and practice with students because it's more complex or students sometimes struggle with it versus something that they're more likely to grab faster or easier. Sometimes we might layer these smaller ones underneath the big ones because they help them, right? Sometimes we can group smaller ones together because we can learn them together. So it's about thinking conceptually about your course content and kind of laying it out and kind of starting to schedule a map for yourself. Getting an idea on how you can sequence your content and make it make sense in 8 weeks. Paul and I talked a little bit about the idea of getting rid of the fluff. when he mentioned that concept, as a faculty, I have an immediate visceral reaction to this. Like when somebody says, get rid of the fluff in your class, you're like, ah, it just makes me mad. There's no fluff in my class. What are you talking about? No way. And in a way, we're right when we say that, right? We don't intend there to be fluff in our classrooms, right? We add things to make them amazing and creative and thoughtful, and we add things to something new, and there's this new thing I want to teach, and then we maybe add something else a year later. Sometimes we add and add and add, and we don't always pull back, right? And so sometimes our courses can get a little loaded, right? And we don't always like to think that way. But it happens to all of us if we don't really think critically about our content. And so what I say is, instead of thinking about removing the fluff, I want you to think about nice to know versus need to know, okay? What are the need to knows? What do they have to know at the end of your course in order to move on, in order to be successful in their jobs, in their next class? What is imperative? That has to be prioritized in your 8-week courses. That nice to know, super awesome. But maybe it's a supplemental resource. Maybe it's something you have to let go of. It's not always easy. I can give you an example. I used to teach a course in human services called Intro to Mental Health, where students, human service students, would learn about all of the primary large group mental health disorders, things like depression, Alzheimer's, all those kinds of disorders. We did this amazing final project at the end of 16 weeks where they would do a mental status exam with the client. They would role play, and so they would be in partners, and there would be any award-winning acting happening about on a mental health disorder, because one would get to play the client, and they maybe do something really complex and get to put on this huge role play. Super fun for students, super fun for me to watch, and they would then conduct this mental status exam. Well, when I was moving this course into an 8-week format, something I found about this really cool assessment that took like 2 weeks to get completed in this course was it didn't actually connect to any of our competencies, right? 2-year human service students, when they go into the field, they can't do a mental status exam. You have to be a master's level practitioner to be doing those kinds of exams. So it's helpful to know about, but they don't need to know how to do it. They don't need to know how to diagnose a client, which is the purpose of that exam, right? It's like actually doing all of those pieces. And what I found is it didn't connect to my course objectives. So when I was thinking about this assessment, I thought, like, this doesn't connect. This is nice to know information, and I have lots of time to do it in 16 weeks. In 8, it's not a need to know. And so maybe I make that very different in an 8-week course. I actually had to let go of that assessment. Super hard. But what ultimately made this 8-week course much stronger, because we didn't have this extra piece that really wasn't being assessed by course competencies. You really want to be paying attention to your assessments. And what I usually tell faculty is, again, you're not just tossing everything out. Just because you're changing formats doesn't mean you have to change everything. So I always say, faculty, look at your current summative assessments, large stakes, big, final, meeting the course goals assessments. Would they work the way they are in an 8-week format? Why or why not? And if not, why and how can we tweak it? Is there a way to tweak it? Is there a way to break it up? Is there a way to utilize what you already have and adjust it ever so slightly so that it can fit better in an 8-week course? Really good example. We have a kind of a teacher prep program, a 2-year degree that leads into a 4-year teaching degree. And one of their courses is reading, and the students had to read 40 children's books as a part of their 16-week course version. When they were converting to 8 weeks, they thought, God, reading 40 in 8 weeks is going to be really cumbersome. Like, how do we, like, that just seems unrealistic. Do we just shrink it? Do we just make them read 20? Do we just, whatever? And they were like, but no, we really need them to interact with this many different books because there's importance to the different categories and types and all this stuff. And so what they ended up doing was they didn't really change much about the assessment, except they put them in groups of 4, and they each read 10. They already had a small report they did with each of the 40 books. So they did reports on all of the 10 books that they read. And then each group member read the reports and had to sign off on these short reports. So what they did was they still interacted with the 40 books, but they did it in a different way. And so it's about just what are those tweaks that you can make to your assessments that will help you best fit that shorter time frame. You'll also want to think about duplication in assessment and quantity versus quality. I always ask faculty, like they might have multiple assessments that measures the same competency over and over and over again. Is this necessary? Sometimes it is. Sometimes there's a reason you might do that. Sometimes there's not. Like the students have already shown you they can do this. They're showing you again they can do this. Why are they still showing you they can do this when you could be moving on to the next piece? Right? So really thinking critically about how much assessment do I need to show me that competency. Formative assessment is also really, really, really important in an 8-week course, and you guys even said this at in the middle when we talked about what are the pieces of a good 8-week course, and it's that practice. It's that formative assessment. Are they practicing enough? Are your choices in practicing meaningful? Are they varied? Are you changing it up? Are you using interaction? Are they collaborating with their classmates, whether it's online or in the classroom? And on the bottom, I always put that one on the bottom because for us as instructors, this is really key. Am I giving them enough feedback, whether that's in the classroom or outside the classroom? 8-week students need a lot of feedback, and it's a faster time frame for us, right? 16-week students need feedback too, but we have more time to give it to them. So the critical piece is that timeliness of feedback. The faster you can give feedback, the better it is for your students. Right? So how often am I giving feedback? How often are they getting it? Is it good quality feedback? Are they able to use it and apply it quickly in the very next competency or learning objective? Okay, we're almost at the end and we'll open it up for questions. So what I really want you guys to take away from this is, you know, as I mentioned at the beginning, as humans, we really do tend to focus on those negatives, right? But when you really look critically at the research, what other colleges are experiencing, what faculty have experienced who've been through the process, the reality is there are a significant amount of advantages that our students reap the benefits of when we use an 8-week course. And so really trying to shift our brains, and it's not easy because change, it sucks, right? It's awful. Change sucks. It doesn't, you can sugarcoat it all you want, but it's hard, right? It's hard for students, it's hard for us, it's hard in our lives. But the reality is the positives really tend to outweigh the negatives here when we see what students can do with an 8-week course, when we see what students can do with flexible options. So, okay, I'm going to put on the board, for those of you guys at home, I'm going to put a virtual business card. Those of you obviously here can also see that. I do have some paper business cards as well, but I'm going to open up for questions. I know we are just a little bit over actual instructional time, so if anybody does need to like rush out, it's totally fine. I will be here till at least 3:30, so we have time for questions. Yes?
Yeah, first of all, thank you and compliment you on your presentation. Enjoyed it.
Thank you.
And learned some good things. Couple of questions.
Sure.
Number of hours to convert from a 16 to an 8. Do you have an average?
Of like how much it took. So the question is this: do I have an idea of the number of hours it took to convert an 8-week course to from a 16 to an 8-week course? You mean for faculty doing the work?
Correct.
I don't have an average like across the board because it really varies on how much change you're making, right? So like when our faculty do curriculum projects, I mean there's this like one like kind of algorithm we use to calculate the number of hours an actual revision of a course project might take, right? It could be 10 hours, it could be 30. It really just depends on the instructor, the course, how much work needs to happen, how much change needs to happen. It also, and I didn't mention this, but like use your resources as faculty. Like you're sitting in this amazing space. I have no doubt there are experts here who can help you, instructional designers who can help you. Like that was the message at our college, like use the curriculum office to really help you do this. They're your partners in this and can really help ease the burden a little bit. Yeah.
Just a couple of follow-ups.
Sure.
Resistance from faculty?
Resistance with faculty. Yes, we did have resistance from faculty. There was a lot of pushback. Why are we doing this? What's the purpose? This is too hard. Just like all of the things we saw in the slide, in the drawback slide at the very beginning. It's not going to be rigorous enough. We're just pushing students through. I think what helped them transition was that laundry basket activity. We actually did a hands-on version of that activity where they actually literally like envisioned buckets and like wrote on a piece of paper and like started to do the work of the conversion. And once we had faculty actually starting to do the conversion work with support, I think they started to realize, oh, this is different than I thought it would be. This is different. We also had a handy partner in all of this in called the pandemic that really shoved our faculty forward. So we had this kind of unique situation where right before we transitioned, all these faculty had to go virtual and had to do tons of work on their course. And so some of that paid some dividends to us, as difficult as it was. It really shoved faculty forward when they had no choice. So that helped us a little bit.
Compensation for faculty.
We did not have compensation for faculty in a significant way for this conversion work. Now, regularly when faculty do curriculum, they do receive stipends based on the number of credits and the type of project at our college. There were some departments who did offer really small stipends for this curriculum work, but for the most part, it was just everyone was doing it. Everyone was doing it in a variety of ways. And then I think what certain departments got creative in how they did it too. So like some departments ended up starting to do it collaboratively. Like for example, our math department, all the faculty who were teaching them, those certain math courses got together and did the conversion work together. So it was really just part of their workload, part of the nature of being the lead on this course or the faculty who teach this course. Yeah. So we didn't have a big pay stipend for that work. Yeah. Yes.
So I'm confident in my 8-week course because I've been teaching it for 15 years or whatever it is.
Sure.
Logistically, how do we get adjuncts to teach 8 weeks when at other schools they're teaching 16 weeks, so they don't have the time, unless it's hybrid or online, which might be why you guys do that, is go mostly hybrid and online. I'm here for pure logistics, like how, let's say a full-time person is doing all their front-loaded 8-week courses the first 8 weeks of the semester. Does that mean they don't come on campus the second 8 weeks? What about contract? And something that really stands out also is, let's say we're offering the second 8 weeks. What if that class doesn't run and now we have a full-time faculty not meeting their load? Like those kinds of problems.
Yeah, we haven't had a lot of issues with workload, I will say. And the question was about logistics around workload and also around adjunct, helping adjuncts make the conversion from 16 to 8. We have not had an issue with adjuncts for the most part. I think you're right. The hybrid piece makes it much easier, right? They're not doubling their contact time. We did have a couple of outlying certificate courses that actually transitioned back. They were like photography courses, and there's like 3 of them that lead to a certificate, and that we had to shift back specifically because of an adjunct being able to teach it, right? So they became 16 weeks because that was a teaching issue. Very tiny example, but really we haven't had issues. I know as myself, as an adjunct, and many adjuncts that I work with actually prefer the 8-week format. So, but I think you're right, the hybrid component, because then they're not in the classroom double, is a piece of that. Workload, we have not had a lot of workload issues. Our faculty workload is spread out over their calendar year, and I don't actually assign faculty workload, so I don't know the real nitty-gritty of it. But I do know that it ebbs and flows for faculty. It does depend on how courses are run. And so they might have a heavier term 1 versus a term 2 in fall. In ideal world, they should be like loaded, right? 2 and 2 or 3 and 2. I know that doesn't always happen. Sometimes it ends up being 4 and 1. That's not ideal for faculty and really something we try to avoid because 4 8-week courses is ridiculous. It's really, really difficult and not an ideal workload for faculty. We have, I think, we have not seen problems in faculty not meeting workloads because of cancellations. I think maybe that is just a juggling of adjuncts, right? Like maybe we're not filling sections right away with an instructor because we think we want to make sure our full-time have that. There might be some like finagling of that's happening that I'm not aware of for sure, but I haven't heard our leadership say this has been really problematic in filling our workloads. Now, if somebody were to have like an unexpected workload decrease, they could just offset that in a future term, or we could fill it with something different like a curriculum project or a different team that they're not typically on. Like there are some other pieces that, ways to move the puzzle that I'm sure that leadership does at times. For sure.
Are you unionized?
No.
I think
We are
that
not.
right there answers everything.
We are not. We do. I mean, technically we do have a union. It's newer. We used to be unionized. Wisconsin went through a huge upheaval, and all the unions were. Yes. Yes.
Do you limit the amount of courses that students can take when they're in an 8-week format?
I don't know if there's technically actually a limit. I don't know like if our registration blocks that or if there's like a permit. There totally could be. I know that in advising, really, they shouldn't be really taking more than 3 in an 8-week term. 3 is the max. And typically 2 is the ideal, right? For a full-time student, 2 and 2. And again, getting at that kind of almost block scheduling, right? Instead of focusing on 4 or 5, they're focusing on 2 and 2 or
Then they won't graduate in time.
They do graduate in time or sometimes faster. They do.
But if it's 2 and 2, they won't. Because they need 5 in fall, 5 in spring.
Not necessarily. It depends on the program. All of our programs went through a sequence, and so they went and laid out their terms. Remember, we have a mandatory summer, so there has to be coursework in summer. So they are year-round. So that actually gave us a little bit of ability to spread things out a little bit. Yeah. So all of our programs have a full 2-year, like they actually had to sit down and lay out their courses across a 2-year, make it make sense, make it fit in the 8-week terms before they could move on to actual curriculum work. Yes?
Do students go through some vetting process or preparation process that what this 8-week course entail?
They don't. When we did shift from 16 to 8, we obviously had a group of students who were more used to 16 and then shifted, right? That probably lasted for like 2 years-ish where we had like those students who you might even hear them say like, oh, I didn't like this. Oh, I like this way better. So we had a little bit of that happen where we had like some LMS support or some, additional hours in our support centers. But really, no. We haven't had this need to like ensure all our students are super amazing students. And actually, I as someone who's taught in 8-week formats for probably like a majority of my teaching career has been in 8-week or accelerated format, 6 weeks, things like that. I've had multiple experiences where I sat in a classroom. I had one early on in my career where I was teaching, and I had one student who, she was older, she really struggled with the technology, and I just thought, oh, she's not going to make it through. She's not going to be able to hack it in this 8-week format, in this accelerated format. And she proved me wrong. And I never obviously changed how I interacted with her. I supported her as much as I could. But she really stands out in my brain as to like, you might think you know what a student needs to be in an 8-week course, but if students want to get their degree, they're gonna adapt and be flexible and learn what they need to learn to get there. Students have the capacity to be successful. They don't have to be these amazing students to be successful in 8 weeks. Yeah.
So I've got 2 comments in the chat.
Okay, great.
One is someone sharing their experience adjuncts to prefer the 8-week format because they can make much more money within an 8-week format versus a 16-week format, which provides good opportunities for courses. And another question, seeing that the vast majority of courses didn't have significantly different outcomes, would you advocate for focusing on switching those areas that saw the biggest improvement, focusing on CTE, Tech Ed, and not switching the entire institution?
I'm not really sure where I land on that. That's a little above my pay grade, right, in making a decision. But if in my magic world, I actually prefer the institutional shift just because I think it's almost easier on students, right? Like the amount of understanding and vocabulary that goes into registering and advising, and some of these students, especially our are students that come with that are underrepresented and maybe don't have some of that kind of cultural equity where they understand how our colleges work, right? Understanding all these different formats and wrapping your brain around that, I think can be fairly complex, right? And even like in our own, even in my, our catalog now, right? Like understanding when something is Zoom versus, and really being able to understand how those course offerings, like the goal is to make that easy for students. So I think when you start to offer all these, tons and tons of options, it can get really complex. Now, that's not to say that that's not successful. I have no doubt there are colleges that offer 16 and 8-week versions of maybe every course, or some areas are 16 and some are 8. I think what you will see typically is you see an increased success in your 8-week courses. Like that's really, really, really common across colleges. If you do the conversion intentionally and thoughtfully, you tend to see this increase in success. Or no change, and students can do just as well. And sometimes that means completing faster. Sometimes it just means their workload is balanced better. And so I hesitate to say like, well, let's only change in these one specific areas. But that's kind of how our college started. We started with some changes in certain areas, or we had an 8-week program alongside a 16, and then we ended up changing the whole institution. So I don't know. I think it really depends on the institution. That's just my thoughts and ramblings, right? Not necessarily, validated by leadership or actually experience. Yes, in the way in the back.
Hi.
Hi.
Welcome to Training College.
Thank you.
Yeah. My question is, at your institution, did your advisors sit down with the students and give them an overview of the 8-week courses that you're registering for, so they know what to expect?
Not really. I mean, I'm sure at some point maybe there was a sheet that was created to like talk about that a little bit. I think actually that probably came from an instructor perspective more than the advising. Some of our advisors have hundreds of students, and so maybe they're not connecting with all of their students in that meaningful way. But we did really support faculty about being very transparent with students about what the work is and really communicating that. And we still talk to faculty about that all the time, right? Making sure you're really upfront with, here's the online, yes, you have online, yes, you have in class. If you skip this piece, it might pretty significantly impact your grade. It's also going to significantly impact your learning and your ultimate results, right? Whether it's a test or a paper, you're not going to be able to do it if you don't do this piece. And helping students along, I think sometimes that gets front-loaded in the early program courses. It's almost like normal program scaffolding. It becomes just part of the way you kind of structure those early courses, right? So I used to teach the first program course in the human services program, and one of the things I always included in day one was just like a really quick, like, remember, you've gotta, like, this course goes quickly. And then I sometimes would maybe just add little reminders. Remember, this course goes quickly. This week is heavy. You need to make sure you're paying attention to that. And I still do that to this day when I teach online. I'm in week 5 of an 8-week term right now, and week 4 is particularly heavy. Actually, week 4 and week 5. So in my announcements in the course and in my interactions in the discussion boards, I'm really talking about, like, hey, make sure you're keeping on pace and reminding them. So it's not formal. There's nothing formal that we did, like, to prepare students, but it's that informal connection, that outreach you do as a faculty member that I think makes the most for our students. Yes.
Does it make sense to maybe, because I think a lot of students register without an advisor.
Yes.
Does it make sense maybe to put a video on the home page, or maybe even when they go into registration, that, click on me to learn more about 8-week courses or something like that?
Totally could. I know we had some videos when we made the transition that were specific to students about what the changes were. Those were kind of at an institutional level, not specific to advising necessarily, but really like so they could understand what the changes were happening and why they were happening for students. So we had a couple of those, but again, they weren't specific to advising, but certainly could be. I think there is like a little pop-up sometimes on some of our courses, like when you look at the way the course is scheduled, or if you're looking at that particular section or you're going to register, you might have to like hey, this is an online course, or hey, this is a hybrid, like helping them understand those formats. But yeah, yes.
Hi, do you have like pure science courses with lab components, and if so, how are you able to handle the load? Because by ICCD standards, you need certain amount of
Contact hours.
lab time that the students need to have. And
Yeah.
how was that moved to 8 weeks?
Yeah, so I don't know that our standards quite fit the exact same way, but we do have science courses, and we do have science courses. What we have is kind of, it's called statewide curriculum, so they have a set of competencies that they have to teach, that they have to like teach, they can't deviate from, right? So there's these set competencies and a set number of teaching hours. Sometimes that was, so like I think of our anatomy and physiology courses, which are struggling a little. The teachers are struggling. The students aren't necessarily struggling when you look at our statistics, but the teachers are really saying, we just think this could be done differently and better if we shifted back. And so I think some of it has been being creative and trying to do some online lab components. There are some tools out there that allow you to kind of do some online labs, so to speak. I think a lot of the in-class group time has become lab time versus some of that lecture that might have been there has now moved to an online format. I think that was probably the most significant change, is any lecturing type components to those courses really moved to an online format. Yes?
So when you move your lab component whether into like simulations or online,
yeah,
is that adding to the students' course fee, because those are not free, the ones that are there?
Not in a significant way that I know of. I think that might be done at a department level. We haven't done that in like a big scale way where there's this extra cost. So it's there hasn't been. It's something that's been absorbed by the department. Yeah, in the back, and then we'll go to Paul, who I think has an online question.
When do you make your course notes available to the students?
Great question. Faculty are required to open it, I think the minimum is 3 days before. Most faculty probably open it a week in advance. That's pretty typical, but anywhere in that week is normal for faculty. They have the choice to open early. We do have faculty open many weeks early. And it really just allows students to get in and take a look at the course, and that's not uncommon in institutions, especially online institutions. There's often that kind of almost like preview window that happens for faculty, but at our institution, it's somewhere in that week right beforehand. Yes?
Have you changed your registration processes where you allow the students now register for multiple 8-week sessions? Let's say they're taking a prerequisite in the first 8 and then the second next level class. How do you deal with that?
I don't know the logistics behind it because I'm not in registration, but I do know that they are able to register for both fall 1 and 2 at the same time at the beginning of fall. And if they have a prereq, like there's some piece that like gets connected. Like if they were to fail, then it somehow gets flagged in the system. I don't know exactly how it works, but there's something about our system that like would connect that to, and I think sometimes leadership in the school knows, like in the programs, right? If you're in the nursing program and you know a student is not producing, you know they can't then move forward. Faculty often know that too. So, yeah. Yes?
We have something here called the Illinois Articulation Initiative, and it's similar to your, I think, the universal credit transfer agreement that you have with the state institutions.
Yes.
Where we have to have so much time dedicated on this, and I think depending on the course of this.
Yeah.
For those folks that are in writing heavy courses, like the English 101, they have to write 5 papers. They have to submit that during the course. It's a summer, it's a semester. We have some question about how do you modify that. Maybe 5 papers in 8 weeks. It's a little tricky.
It is a little tricky. It's super hard. We I think have a little bit more freedom in our assessments where it isn't like we don't have standards where it's like you have to write 5 papers. So we have a little bit of more flexibility than it sounds like that particular example would have. But what I usually suggest is really looking at how you can break down pieces of those papers and how you can utilize class time to help that development of those papers, right? So that it's not always 100% that full outside classroom time. So if I can identify some classroom time where they're working on pieces or collaboratively working on pieces to help sometimes even out that workload, I really have to look at the specific assessments to make like really, some really specific recommendations. But what I would normally tell our faculty is to chunk it out a little bit, right? But we don't have that, like, you have to write 5 papers in a particular course. We do have like contact hour requirements, but.
I'm going to join the tradition of asking 2 or 3 questions.
I love it. Yes, go ahead.
So that's for our writing heavy classes.
Yeah.
What about our applied technology classes? What do your folks do with your labs? We have the science folks that have significant lab components.
Yep.
We talked a little bit about that in
Yep.
physiology. Just general tech, automotive.
Yeah.
Do they really reimagine those?
Yeah, I mean, they reimagine it. They really prioritize, obviously, all the hands-on stuff is happening in person. The hybrid component might be less, right? It might be more in person versus less online. So they've done some flexible kind of movement, right? It might be a 70-30 split versus 50-50 in those classes. And in some cases, like in the really applied, we do have a couple that do just, they've doubled their classroom time. But for most of them, what they're doing is they're prioritizing those labs or the hands-on components to the face-to-face, and then utilizing that hybrid for some of that less, hands-on component outside the classroom. Yeah. Does it make sense? Yes.
When your instructors were converting, let's say, a class that was already offered online within 16 weeks into the 8 weeks,
yes,
or face-to-face to online, was there some kind of peer review or any kind of review of that course after the conversion?
We didn't do anything formal. We worked fairly collaboratively with faculty, and so we kind of saw a lot of them as they were working, and so there wasn't really this need to like do a big formal review at the end. I think every once in a while we have courses where the faculty feel like they're struggling, and they now will come to us and be like, hey, I just feel like I'm struggling here. And so on the back end, now that we're a few years removed, we sometimes see faculty will come to us to be like, I just want, like, this feels clunky. It just doesn't feel like it's working as well. And so we have this ability to kind of work with faculty after the fact, but we didn't use a formal process. When they actually do formal curriculum projects, we work collaboratively with them all along the way. But during that conversion, because of the breadth of the work, faculty did that with support, but we didn't have a formal review process at the end. Hang on, right here, yes.
So you mentioned earlier the ideal student was taking 2 classes and 2 classes.
Yep.
Is that safe to say it's 12 credit hours per semester, or was there more?
No, typically, I mean, it depends on the program and it depends on the semester, right? But I would say most of our programs were like 4 to 5 courses over a 16-week term, depending on what the student wanted to take, right? And so then those typically split, right? 2 and 3 or 2 and 2.
Test rates differently if you have like the 15, 16 credit hours per semester, because that's kind of like what a full-time student does here.
No, I mean, we haven't seen a difference and I think anecdotally from students we hear in most courses that the ability to focus on just 2 and then 2 more versus like 4 total is easier, right? Or even if they're doing 3 and 2, which is less likely, because keep in mind 85% of our students are part-time. So we don't have that like students who are always doing full-time all the time. Those are our outliers more than our most common students. But those students that are going full-time, they often like our 8 weeks because they don't have to juggle 5, right? They're not juggling 5 for 16 weeks. It's actually easier for them to juggle 2 or 3 and then 2 or 3 separately.
Yeah, just in the beginning, right, like do they have anything that's going to, they might think that they can do the 4 classes and then all of a sudden they fail all 4 classes. So is there any limits or anything that
well, like I think we had that question before, like is there anything to block them from taking that? I don't actually know that because I don't know our registration system, but I would imagine that like adding, that might get flagged in our system if somebody were to try to take 4. I don't know that that's something students do. Like, I don't know, I've never heard that that's a big issue where students are like really trying to cram it all into one semester. I think that's very, very, very rare, and I doubt most of our students are doing it.
Last question.
Yeah.
Are the students that are taking AP classes, are they getting the textbook provided? Or is that something that they get on their own?
Yeah, I mean, we do still have situations where they're buying the textbook outside of the classroom, either from our bookstore or from wherever they want. But we have seen a significant, one of our initiatives was to start using electronic textbooks so that they're there at the beginning of the course. And we have seen a significant increase in how faculty are doing that, whether it's through one of our providers is Red Shelf or even just through the publisher, right? And having it. And so I would say, I don't know the percentage off the top of my head, but we have a high percentage of classes that have the textbook in the classroom. It's part of tuition embedded in the course. That also impacts student success, just as an FYI. I didn't really cover that, but we have seen that having textbooks in the classroom at the beginning makes a big difference, especially for underrepresented students, because they don't have to go out and buy materials. They don't have to wait. They don't have to wait for their financial aid. It's not this challenge or barrier that they need. It's just there. Yeah. Yes.
So going back to exactly that question.
Yes.
And going back to this conversion component.
Yeah.
Aside from your LMS that you have to convert, was anything now that when you're doing that transition, was any additional tools like you're now mentioning ebook that now became a necessity for both departments to have, or increasing the cost?
I mean, ebooks is probably the primary answer. I think a lot of our programs went to ebooks or some type of publisher resource or publisher component. And actually that's in a lot of cases, the ebook version is cheaper for students. And so it actually saves students money and there is an additional cost to us. I think during the pandemic, there were a couple of pieces, like we had to add something to allow students to get like remote access to software. And so we had some pieces around that happened, but it wasn't specific to the 8-week conversion. It was pandemic driven. Yeah.
We have inclusive access here where we have the cost.
Yes.
A lot of books embedded in the tuition.
Yes.
To students, and then they're not physical textbooks, it's those electronic resources.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a pretty big, important piece of 8 weeks. It goes fast. If you don't get your textbook by week 3, you are way behind, right? You need that access, so super important. Yes.
So I would think, and I just want to know what your school's experience is, I would think it would be a lot to ask an adjunct to convert a course. So are you seeing full-timers do it and hand it off to adjuncts, and then they can modify it when they...
I think in our conversion process, yes, the full-timers were the ones doing that process. I do think we do have small pockets of adjuncts where maybe, it's a one faculty program. Like we have those really smaller programs where maybe an adjunct is more involved and might do some of that work. In that case, that adjunct is typically compensated in some way, shape, or form, right? Because that's different than writing it. But in most cases, yes. Our full-timers during the conversion were creating those courses and then pushing them on adjuncts. Yes.
Do you have any OER courses?
We do have some. That's a significant push that we are currently undertaking, trying to increase our OERs and AERs. I think majority of our courses don't use them yet. It just hasn't gained traction as much. I think sometimes for some of our courses, it's difficult. Our faculty see it as like just one more thing, right? As their workload has gotten bigger and bigger, that they haven't been able to really like devote the time to. But we do have some courses that are full OER or AER, and then we have the inclusive access piece. Yeah, something we're working on. Yes.
How do they approach the attendance policy? Because I have 6-hour labs, and if they miss 2 days in an 8-week section, that's when a lot of the students tend to disappear.
Yeah. I think that varies pretty widely across our campus attendance. It really depends, and it depends on what the requirements are, because in some cases, in some programs, there are requirements. Like if you can't miss, like cosmetology, for example, you have to have a required number of classroom hours. You can't miss, and so if you do miss, fail the class or you have to make up your hours in some way, shape, or form. So it really varies across our campus. But yeah, I mean, typically I've seen anything to an open attendance policy where you might miss points and then you're risking your grade, right? And then they don't necessarily worry about the number of classes they're missing. Or you can't miss more than 2. Like that's it. You can't miss more than. It really just depends on the class. So it's a pretty wide range across our campus. Yeah. So you have to look at what the requirements are for the course. Yeah. When we first started 8 weeks, it was really common to say you couldn't miss more than 1 week. Like you could be absent once. That was a really common policy initially. And then I think we saw more diversity in policies depending on the program. Yes. Yes. Last question.
Have you invested as a college into additional supports for the students? Have you hired more tutors? Anything, to make that position more successful?
I don't know that we hired more. We had a pretty robust student services population, right? Like instructors, support instructors. That was already fairly robust. I think I don't know if that's across all technical colleges, but at our technical college, the student services side is pretty great. So we didn't see the need to drastically increase our services around that. But I mean, I could certainly see why that might be ideal if you don't already have those resources. Yes. All right, well, that is my time, but I will, as I'm wrapping up, my card is still up on the screen. If you have questions that you wanted to shoot me, you certainly can shoot me an email or give me a call. I'm happy to answer them as best I can and talk through things. Like if you have course questions or thought or anything, you're more than welcome to reach out to me. I'm always happy to talk that stuff through.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.